Can you hear us now? 13 notes toward listening. 1. Imagine that each of you is carrying a phone. It's not hard to imagine our palm-sized black flat devices blinking alive with the push of a button, a text, vibration, or ring. No longer mounted to a wall, coiled or cordless, dialed or operated by a switchboard. Perhaps you're reading your phone now, scrolling through the AWP schedule to plan your next step, next panel, next reading, as your phone stands in for a book. Most of us likely get good reception in this urban center, rather than when roaming in the country, where phone conversations often lead to echoed questions of what, or to echo that old Verizon ad, can you hear me now? 2. There's a well-known party game called Telephone that unfolds through whispers in a neighbor's ear. The spoken twist on chain mail relies on close listening and delights in slips and errors, where errors become heirs or hairs or hearers. Earlier versions of the game go by Chinese whispers, Russian scandal, or just plain gossip, where the story at the beginning doesn't resemble the story at the end, deformed into something else through sequential erosions in our ears. Imagine a sentence to say to your neighbor here, something pithy enough to remember, but slippery enough to sail away your speech. Something like, writing about music is like dancing about architecture. 3. Writing about music is like dancing about architecture. It's a sentiment that echoes across sources. Long before the title of this panel, the sentence was attributed variedly to Laurie Anderson, Elvis Costello, Steve Martin, Thelonious Monk, Frank Zappa, and Martin Mull, with related renditions dating back to 1918 in The New Republic, in which it was written that writing about music is as illogical as singing about economics. To dance about architecture, to sing about economics. It's a question that I wrestle with in my book, On Marvelous Things Heard, published by Green Lantern Press, a collection of 178 micro-essays that borrows its title and formal template from Aristotle, numbered like this presentation. Rather than Aristotle's marvels, which bear more resemblance to those of Herodotus, my variation of On Marvelous Things Heard explores literary appropriations of music and silence, translation and metamorphosis, unfolding in counterpoint. 4. As a counterpoint to this talk, visually, I will continue by playing in the background the anti-trailer from my novel, Galerie de Difformite, published by Ann Now Books. The film is a collaboration with the installation artist Claudia Esslinger. I've silenced the voiceover narration for this talk to see what other associations form from the juxtaposition with these numbered notes on translation. 5. Translation derives from the Old French meaning to transfer. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, definitions include transference, removal, or conveyance from one person, place, or condition to another, transference of a body or form of energy, the action or process of turning from one language into another, the expression or rendering of something in another medium or form, like a painting by an engraving or etching, transformation, alteration, change, changing or adapting to another use, renovation. In long-distance telegraphy, the automatic retransmission of a message by means of a relay. Amid these OED definitions, what gets lost in translation? What gets found? 6. A few months ago at the Boston Center for the Arts, I collaborated with the dancer Mariah Steele on teaching a workshop about writing movement, moving words. In planning our workshop, we discussed analogous practices, what impulses she put into choreographed movements, what I strung into words, where our practices met. Our workshop grew into a sequence of collaborative activities built around acts of translation and types of ekphrasis, call and response between gestures and sounds, shapes and silences. After warm-up movements, we distributed pages of intermixed word lists by the artists Richard Serra, Yuichiro Kojiro, and Ellen Sheffield, inviting participants to speak phrases out of order, materializing the syllables in time and space, overlapping or in isolation, shouted or whispered, testing out the scope of the room's physical space and the range of our linked voices, orally feeling out edges and echoes. 6.5. Kojiro's forms of change resemble Serra's verb list of infinitives, including to roll, to crease, to fold, to bend, to twist, to tear, to disarrange, to mix, and so on. In that room, these infinitives turned from past into future, adapted by speakers, intermixing also with word lists from reading from the book artist Ellen Sheffield, with whom I'll co-teach a workshop this summer at the Kenyon Review Writers' Workshop on the literary hybrid. One physical rearrangement of her word list led to my arc of forgetting, absences and silences, instruments of real time and space, circumstances of the dislocation you told yourself, stories I told myself, how to remember, a force illegible, legible, and reread inner book, geography of chance, changed, forced associations, connecting. 7. The tradition of dancing between the arts harks back to antiquity, to the classical Laocoon, who prophesied the Trojan horse would bring down Troy. His surviving statue depicts this father between two sons wrestling with a massive snake, a statue translated in the 18th century by William Blake, whose etched and engraved Laocoon buzzes with phrases around the writhing contours of entwined bodies. A near contemporary, G. E. Lessing, used the Laocoon as the title of his artistic treatise, subtitled The Limits of Poetry and Painting, a debate pulled into the realm of music in the 20th century by the likes of Irving Babbitt and Clement Greenberg, continuing to haunt this discussion. When one art aspires to the realm of another, there is only so far you can go before crossing into the other realm, rather than navigating and tracing the boundary between. This space between genres, media, bodies, disciplines, locations, and more is what interests me. 8. My new novel, The House Enters the Street, published by Starch-Your-Own Books, takes cues from medieval methods of sight-singing to modern art, transposing the title of a painting by Umberto Baccioni called The Street Enters the House. In the novel The House Enters the Street, 7 storylines interweave in the vein of musical modulation, as if composed in 7 key signatures. Each storyline is told in a different voice and cadence, set in different periods, slowly tuning to one another's sounds and senses, modulating toward a home key. One storyline of The House Enters the Street begins, "She's going home, not straightaway crow dart of a black arrow going home, but a curvaceous, loopy, roundabout, colorful waving, goodbye, hello, good course of going home, not by plane, train, coach, or car, but by foot, through labyrinthian halls and echoing galleries, where marble athletes lack legs, hands, noses, breathing, floor-to-ceiling canvases, blue nudes and strung guitars, head-dressed gazelles with locked horns, beaded ear flaps, iron mudfish and pendant masks, breathing, like a whorled conch, murmuring, voyeurs whisper, stare, and bend to listen, knees crack she hears, shuffling and look, to incisions and scars, what doesn't speak is broken, between each line and curve, echoes. Another storyline begins, his life began with the sea. 9. Writing about music is like dancing about architecture. Writing about music is like dancing about architecture. Writing about music is like dancing about architecture. 10. Can you hear us now? 11. Dancing about architecture inherently involves displacement and charting the distance. Not long ago, I heard a talk by the cross-disciplinary, cross-species scholar Donna Haraway, in which she encouraged staying with the trouble, a phrase that seems both vital and vibrant as it encourages an intricate engagement with flawed and risky translations, echoing the anthropologist Marilyn Strathern, who writes that it matters what ideas one uses to think other ideas with, which Haraway has adapted, it matters what stories we use to tell other stories with. 12. Where do I go from here? What stories or poems or essays or hybrids do I, and do you, want to tell or hear? Do I talk about the composer, John Cage, going into a soundproof chamber and hearing his circulatory and nervous systems, realizing true silence doesn't exist? Or do I mention hearing a woman describe attending poetry readings without her hearing aids, taking notes from the mumble that she heard across the transom, as if a self-imposed game of telephone, reassembling words into her own translated sequence of senses? Or do I share how her story reminded me of when I first had to use voice-activated software, long before Siri, back in early 2000, when as a physically debilitated high school teacher in Silicon Valley, my students gifted me an early incarnation of Dragon Naturally Speaking, where I spoke into its echo chamber of algorithms that spelled back words that didn't resemble my own, forcing me to listen more closely to what I was trying to say? Or do I turn this into a fable about listening? There's always a garden of forking paths, right? Here be dragons and other monsters in the margins. 13. One way that I stay with the trouble is deforming, practicing Difformite, inviting people to participate in this quest of questions about form in motion, writing movement and moving words, process as product, deforming fiction as poetry, as essay, as art, both gallery and library, museum and book, exhibits and pages, material and virtual, growing in and out of one another. A baggy monster, to borrow Henry James's characterization of the genre of the novel, structured as a choose-your-own-adventure art catalog, engaging traditional and new media, like this film and QR codes printed in the book, a twist on the game of telephone. Galerie de Difformite is never static, a living organism growing through crowdsourced deformations of the book, collaborative engagements, pop-up exhibitions, critical and pedagogical materials across disciplines at varied colleges, with other offshoots planned here and welcomed through participants' interpretations and interventions. Should anyone here wish to participate, please talk with me afterward or email me at difformite@gmail.com. That's DIFFORMITE. In the process of this project, whose wide-ranging influences include John Cage's As Slow as Possible, which is a performance occurring over 600 years, my role as author and that implied authority will deform through communal engagement. 13. Coda. There's the rub. There's always some kind of rubble or residue left over, not only materially, but also orally, eroding and evolving by ear as happens in a game of telephone. So let my ending suggest a beginning, through a snippet of wreckage, by land and by sea, the title of my poetry chapbook published by Dancing Girl Press, which dives beneath its cartographic surface to listen to whales' songs. Under the surface, serpents sing. Without vocal cords, humpbacks' songs range beyond the highest and lowest frequencies that humans hear. Tonalities entwine into songs, into long song patterns often repeated for hours in constant evolution. In a region, all humpbacks sing the same song, and each introduces themes as the breeding season progresses. The song at the end of the season differs from the song at the beginning, which continues to change until song after long song patterns, after years, the song is hardly recognizable when compared with its earlier form.